benefit. Like I studied classical saxophone. I started when I was 10. I knew I wanted to be a music major in college, even though I didn't really know what that meant. Um, all of my degrees are in saxophone performance. They're all classical, and for most of, I would say, like my college years, and then coming out of my student years, I really fell in love with the idea of commissioning and performing new music as the way I was going to contribute to the art form, and I loved the thrill of working with new composers, and I think I liken it a lot to like being an actor working with different directors and different writers, where like to me like the challenge of trying to unlock someone else's language and then do the best job I could to execute it and to like kind of serve that language was an absolute thrill for me. But I can clearly remember, uh, even though this is not new music, just as a listener or as a musician, when I was in my 20s, I loved Mahler. Oh, I loved Mahler. I would listen to like the beginning of the Ninth Symphony and I would cry and I would feel it, you know. And I got to this place around the same time where I would kind of be in that mood to, all right, and I'd put on Mahler, and it just wasn't resonating with me the same way anymore. It felt like, oh, you know, it felt like looking at a beautiful vase from a civilization and a time that I don't belong to. And so I could listen to it and appreciate the aesthetic and absolutely respect the craft, but it didn't have anything to do with the life that I was living. I'm happy to talk in way more detail about how I went from classical saxophone land to where I'm at currently, but that's the crux of it. So I asked myself. This was all very much just me talking to myself, but it's like, okay, you say you can't find any composers you like anymore. Boo hoo. But you're not burnt out on music, so guess you better step up to the plate and try to make some of your own music. That's how things shifted for me. It was a very natural process. It took a long time. There were, I'll mention later, but there were definitely key people, like important people outside of me, that were absolutely instrumental in helping me feel confident in exploring my own stuff. I don't have any composition degree. Just because I've worked with composers doesn't mean I've, you know, spent time in that world as one. And something that we may or may not get to a whole lot, but that I'll say is, as I get older, I'm 44 now. I feel so aware of how much of Western art music is, you know, for you, by you, for white males. And for those of us who happen to not be white guys, you don't realize how shut out or how much you may feel like your voice isn't invited to the party until you start trying to have one and realizing that, like, oh, part of why it hadn't occurred to me to do that is like I don't know, don't see a lot of women represented. um, Throughout my entire education, I didn't see a lot of women being represented in all areas of making music. So my mood, for each of these things: mood, form, and then the skill set I think I need to execute those things. And so that way I know what even though I'm not practicing improvising when I work on that skill set, I think it's absolutely essential to limit your language. When people talk about free improvisation, a lot of times there's this fallacy of thinking that like free means anything, and the idea of anything is kind of dumb, frankly. Like, I mean, like that's asking a lot, and it's also not necessary. And so, what I have to do for myself then, as far as the skill set goes, is that means every year I still struggle with this, but I commit to a certain skill set based on the improvisations I'm trying to get better at. And as we all know, like, you know, time is a zero-sum game, and so it means committing myself to getting really deep with certain certain skills and being okay with other ones maybe falling by the wayside, and that's a big like ego check, I think, because the feeling of like, oh, like, I don't know, if I had to perform Albright next week, like maybe a hard pass on the on the third movement, you know.